Welcome to The Homeless Conservative, a show about principled politics for exhausted citizens. I'm Blake Fisher. I'm a political junkie, so you don't necessarily have to be. Anyone see that eclipse this week? That was fun. I've never seen a totality eclipse. I've seen several other eclipses in my life, never one that was that cool, though. You know, like I didn't ever get to see the whole thing. The last one that we had, I guess 7 years ago was, I don't know, maybe like 60, 70% or something in Oklahoma. And it was fun. I remember I did it with my 3-year-old daughter, and we did the whole, we didn't have glasses because, of course, I procrastinated and didn't buy glasses in time, and then you just could not find them anywhere. I should have probably looked a little bit harder. I didn't look hard enough because my wife, who didn't give a hoot about the eclipse 7 years ago, just goes to get her hair done. And while she's at the salon, someone's like, hey, you want to try these glasses? Go look at the eclipse. And so she got to look at the eclipse. And my daughter and I are setting up like a monoscope with a cardboard box around it to block out the light that would then basically project a shadow of the sun as it's being eclipsed at the time, which was cool. I saw the International Space Station go across the sun, which was cool. Fun stuff, right? But I marked my calendar because I knew that 7 years from then, this week, April 8th, we'd have a total eclipse, which now I just have that song coming in my head, Total Eclipse of the Heart, and which I'm sure got played. I'm sure got a lot of streams. I am confident that whoever wrote that song got a significant bump this week in a paycheck because a bunch of people were playing that probably during the eclipse. But anyway, I marked my calendar. I said, we're definitely going. I couldn't even imagine my daughter at the time being 10 years old, and now she is, and it feels like time just flies by, as everyone tells you when you become a parent. And so we, fortunately, Southeast Oklahoma was in totality. And so we just decided, hey, we're going to go down there and we are going to see this thing in all its glory. So we went to my parents' lake house, which is out in eastern Oklahoma, and then drove down that day, went to a U.S. park and set up camp. We did a little picnic, sandwiches. All the nieces and nephews were there, and we watched this thing, and it was incredible. It was really, really cool to get to see it completely get blocked out. And then you get to take the glasses off for like 3 minutes and just look at the moon blocking the sun with all its little, I guess the sun is especially active right now. There's this cycle that the sun goes through. And the last one we had was pretty early in that, so it wasn't as active. And now it's very active. So you've got these little, not sunspots. I can't remember exactly what the description of the little red points on the ends. But anyways, very cool. You're kind of in darkness. It's weird how the temperature dropped. It's weird how the wind stopped blowing. The other thing that I had no idea to expect, and now I will be prepared in 20 years when the next one happens in the United States that we have totality for. So I've got a long way to wait, but I didn't really think about the physics, I guess, of the sun getting blocked out where I am, but to just, miles around me, so call it 50 miles one way or 50 miles the other way, the sun is not completely blocked out and therefore it is shining. So you sort of end up with this crazy 360-degree sunset situation where it looks kind of like a sunset, but it's not really a sunset because the sun is right overhead. You're just blocked from the sun, but everything around you isn't. And I guess there's some people like on the International Space Station that get to watch this from space. They get to not only see the eclipse in space, which I'm sure is incredible because the lack of light leak, you would just have like incredible stars, I would imagine. But they also get to just watch this black dot move across the United States of the shadow of the moon on the Earth, which makes sense. But to get to see that from both sides. But I just didn't realize that you'd have this sort of 360-degree sunset around you. Although we didn't really have the 360 because we were up in the hills. We don't really have mountains in Oklahoma. This is the closest thing to it that we have, are these kind of big hills down in southeastern Oklahoma as you get to sort of the pretty part of Oklahoma and Arkansas. And anyway, it's really cool. If I do one again in the future, I would try to be on either a really flat area or at the highest point possible so that you could kind of see that light sort of 360 sunset looking thing. Anyway, it's a weird experience. If you didn't get to see the totality, I highly suggest you do so in 20 years. If, that's the next one we get is in 2044. But then we have one in 2045 too. So somehow I don't understand why. I guess it's just the luck of how the Earth's spinning, and a lot of times these happen over the oceans. So yeah, Eclipse was awesome. Really appreciate it. Loved it. And it was fun to get to see totality. I highly suggest you do that. But that has nothing to do with politics. I just figured you might want to know. I just feel like as we go through these, as we get more bespoke in all of our and niched down in all of our preferences. 50 years ago, we had 3 channels. When I was a kid, we certainly had cable television, but we had like maybe 50 channels. Now there's hundreds of channels. Now we've got streaming services. Now you've got Spotify, where I can listen to absolutely any song I want to, essentially, in the history of music. And I feel like we all have these little bespoke things. We can just listen to what we want to. We can just watch what we want to. And we don't have these shared experiences anymore, other than maybe the Super Bowl. That's the last thing that I feel like everyone watches. But you're not going to have like the season finale or the series finale of MASH numbers watching a television show, even something like Game of Thrones or something that's a huge cultural hit. It's just not, the number of eyeballs watching that are few. And I also love the idea of something that we don't only all experience together, but we experience at the same time, because now that I can stream things, I can just watch it anytime I want to, or I can listen anytime I want to. But the eclipse, you got to be there and you got to watch it. It's like, that's it. You get that 3-minute window. That's all you get. And so I kind of love that. I guess we don't really all experience it at the same time, because if you're in Dallas, it was half an hour before Southeast Oklahoma, and then it moves up the country. But, the same day, it's kind of a fun thing. Anyway, just a side tangent of something that I wish we had a few more sort of everyone's in on it cultural experiences for as a country or as a world or whatever we want to talk about. So anyway, that has nothing to do with politics. So let's get into what the actual show's about. We're going to talk about Biden's, I don't know, is this his like umpteenth attempt at canceling student debt? He just made this campaign promise, and he is determined to cancel student debt or forgive student debt. There's all sorts of ways that they're talking about it. If you're not aware, he campaigned on this, claims student debt needs to be forgiven, and tried using the HEROES Act in the past, which is a law Congress passed after 9/11 to take care of student loans for people that were like active military, right? This is a very specific point of the act. Biden tries to use it. This is just the thing that the executive branch does now. And this is not exclusive to Biden. This is Trump did this stuff. Obama did it before him. Bush did it before him. This sort of like, let's sick the lawyers on every law that's ever been written, and let's find a loophole in it that we think we can exploit to do what we want to do, even though we know what we're doing is probably wrong and will probably get struck down by the courts. And the point of it all is to say, look, I'm fighting for you. I'm trying my best, but that darn Supreme Court says this is illegal, because that's what happened. He tried to use the HEROES Act, tried to wipe out, what was it? 430 billion is what the price tag of the HEROES kind of act version of student debt cancellation he was going to do is. That's a ton of money. And sure enough, the Supreme Court comes in and says, you can't do that. You're not allowed to. That's Congress's job. Congress has the power of the purse. That's what Article 1 is in the Constitution. It lays out the stuff that Congress can do. Article 2 says, guess what, the president, you don't have control over gigantic budgetary spending. You can't affect that big a chunk of the economy without congressional approval. And it's one of these things that then he gets to delegitimize the Supreme Court and pretend that, if those darn conservatives weren't on the court, we'd get this done. There certainly are 3 liberals on the court that will just allow anything to happen. I'm not sure that the 3 liberal justices have any kind of, this is a tangent, I guess, but I'm not sure they have any sort of jurisprudence or any sort of, I guess people say what they have is they think the Constitution's like this living thing and that they can inject what they want to. I don't believe that stuff, obviously. I think the Constitution is written in a certain way, and we should look at it, and we should look at it in the way that they wrote it, and with in mind that obviously the framers of the Constitution knew that technology would change. They knew things would change, and they were trying to hedge on that as much as they could. So they refer to transportation instead of just ships because they knew more forms of transportation would show up, right? So all that to say, this got struck down. Biden says, that's not going to stop me. I'm going to keep trying. And so this is his new attempt. It's called the SAVE. It's not really an act, I guess, because it's really just an executive order, but SAVE stands for Saving on a Valuable Education. I guess the A is part of that acronym. I don't know why we have to do this, and I hate all the acronym stuff that we do, that we have to spell out and make it say something. But anyway, it's called the SAVE Act, and basically this one would cost, although the Biden administration did not actually put a number to it, I think for obvious reasons, but the estimated cost is $475 billion over the next 10 years, as opposed to the $430 billion of the last one. And he's doing some goofy legal stuff here, of course. But I don't see any way that if the Supreme Court said that his $430 billion version was too big a chunk of money for the president to be controlling without congressional approval, it doesn't seem like $475 billion is gonna pass muster. And this is already getting sued. There's 7 states already on a lawsuit basically saying this is illegal. You can't do this. We already did this once. Supreme Court said it wasn't illegal. Nothing has changed. And so we're suing to say it's illegal. So I don't think this is going to hold up. This is one of those things that Biden, the last one would have been quicker because it was just going to forgive $10,000 or $20,000 depending on certain criteria of federal loans, essentially, and it would do it pretty quickly. This one's slower because I don't really totally understand all the details, but essentially it's something where people wouldn't even be looking to have debt forgiven until 2025. If you're not aware, there's an election between now and 2025, and that's what this is really all about. This is just Biden playing to his constituency and trying to give a carve out to them so that he gets their votes. This is a way to get young voters who are disillusioned with his opinions on and views on Israel, for example, or pick any of the other things that they don't like him on. This is a way to try to bring him back in the fold. And I think it's kind of gross because of that. So I just don't think that the executive branch is not meant to do this kind of stuff. And this is my biggest problem with current politics in America, is that we have idolized the president to be this sort of caretaker and father figure, and we idolize it in a weird way. I've said before, I hate flags for presidents. I think that Trump flags are weird and gross. I think Obama flags were weird and gross. I think it's all very strange because we are supposed to be the people in the country that have the power. We're supposed to be the people that control this stuff. We are the governed, but we elect these people. We shouldn't be flying a flag of one of our politicians. It seems really weird to me, but that's kind of what it's turned into. We think the president can do everything because these candidates get on television and on campaigns and they say, I'm going to do this on day one. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. And Biden just did all this with the State of the Union. I did an episode a few weeks ago, right after the State of the Union, talking about, yeah, this is all just Biden claiming this is what I want to do. This is what I want to do. But he has no way to do it without Congress doing it. The way we get things done in this country is Congress has to make a law. The House of Representatives and Senate have to agree. They have to both approve and vote on a law. And then in the Senate still, that's 60 votes that you have to get. So it's not just a simple majority. And then we pass that to the president to sign or veto. That's what the president is supposed to be able to do. And then the president is just supposed to execute the law. That's why we call it the executive branch. The president is not supposed to be the one making laws. That's not how our country was set up. That's not how the Constitution is laid out. But we have totally flipped that. And now we think the president is the person that does everything. And the president likes to take credit for everything, even if they had nothing to do with it. And they also get the blame for stuff that honestly they shouldn't get the blame. But they're going to get the blame when they pretend that they can also take the credit for everything. All of this is to say this is not the president's job to forgive student debt. If Congress wants to do it, we can have a conversation about it. I still think it's immoral to do, and I'll talk about that in a little while, but I don't think that most people understand that. And if you don't believe me that this is illegal, let's talk to Nancy Pelosi about it. This is kind of a famous clip from before, like Biden was talking about student debt forgiveness. A lot of people were demanding that he give student debt forgiveness. And I really think this was more of a way for her to cover for him. But this is what she said about it. And she's absolutely right. Here it is.
People think that the President of the United States, is this more on the subject than you ever want to know? Well, you'll let me know. People think that the President of the United States has the power for debt forgiveness. He does not. He can postpone, he can delay, but he does not have that power. That has to be an act of Congress. And I don't even like to call it forgiveness because that implies a transgression. It's not to be forgiven. Just freeing people from those obligations. So the question of who gets forgiven, to use the term of art that is out there, is a debate. Do we use whatever money there is for the broadest base of support of those with more people with even less debt or fewer people with more debt? That's a policy discussion. But the difference between the president can't do it. So that's not even a discussion. Not everybody realizes that, but the president can only postpone, delay, but not forgive.
She's totally right, which I don't often say about Nancy Pelosi. I obviously disagree with Nancy Pelosi on a lot of things, but she's right. This is Congress's job, and she was laying out that, like, look, the president can't do that. That's plainly illegal. Biden knows this. Every Democrat knows this. They're just pretending that it's not because it's something they want to do. And Trump did this too. Like, this is not, I think Biden's been especially egregious and gross about it, but Trump did this too with the border wall. He tried to move money around and say, like, I can use this money for this. And it got knocked down too, because no, you can't. You don't have the power of the purse. The Supreme Court specifically found in this Biden HEROES Act, try to use, that he could not unilaterally alter large sections of the American economy, that the president doesn't have that power. And so Nancy Pelosi is right in this situation, but Democrats and the people that want this are pretending that that's not the case. And this is just something that infuriates me so much because let's get into the details of why I think that this is immoral. It's not just that I think it is not President Biden's job. I don't think it would be a good thing for Congress to do either. But, the legality is the first thing that I don't like about this. It's definitely the thing that bothers me, but it's not the only thing that bothers me because I think there's a moral problem here. So let's look at some stats on college debt. Okay, so the first thing to understand is that 66% of this country never went to college. Here's a little pie chart if you're watching, if you're listening. I'm sorry about all the math I'm about to rattle off. If you're just listening to the podcast, some of these visuals probably help a little bit. I'll try to explain them as much as I can. So 66% of the country doesn't go to college. That means maybe they went to trade schools, maybe they didn't go to school at all, but 66%, so 2/3 of the country doesn't have college debt because they never went to college. We assume most of those people, though, are productive members of society, paying taxes, they have jobs, things like that, right? There's another 22% of the country that did. So of the third of the country that goes to college, 22% of that, so roughly 2/3 of that, is people that paid their debts already. So they went to college, they got a degree, they got a job, they paid off their debts. That's 22% of the country. That remains 12% of the country that owes student debt. All right. So what you're doing in this situation, if you try to cancel student debt or forgive student debt, that ledger doesn't just go away. We paid the money. If you get a federal loan to go to college, the federal government pays that college immediately. We're not paying back the colleges. You're paying back the federal government. I think maybe just some people don't understand how this works. So the colleges immediately get paid money, which means they have no incentive to make that degree valuable. They have no incentive to lower their cost. They have no real incentive because when you're dealing with price competitiveness, the 18-year-old kid that's going to college isn't really doing price comparisons so much right that moment because so many people are just going like, well, it's a loan I'm getting from the government. The government's really paying it. And you do have to pay that money back. I think people don't understand how debt works, obviously, or we wouldn't have so much credit card debt and we wouldn't have so much student loan debt. We wouldn't have just debt across the board that's generally not great. Some debt's great, but this is one of those situations where you probably shouldn't spend, say, $100,000 on a private education for, some liberal arts study if you can't get a job that's going to allow you to pay that loan back, right? So we can talk about the silliness of that kind of thing, but that's not even most of the people that have these degrees. Most of these people have degrees that they actually do use and they get good jobs. But 12% of the country still has not paid these loans back. And so you're asking 88% of the country to pay the debt of 12% of the country. And I just think that's wrong. I don't see how that could be justified when it's not a program that even affects normal, like across demographics. There are some demographics that this goes across, but not really, because this isn't even helping the most poor Americans. So if 66% of the country never goes to college and 22% of the country went to college, but they paid their debts already, how is it fair to make all of those people pay for the debts of the 12% of people that haven't paid their debts yet? It would be one thing if these people that were in that 12% were all poor, down on their luck. There was some sort of reason that they need their debts forgiven and they cannot pay them. But that's not the case, since most of the debt is held by people who have masters or PhDs, 56%. So remember, we're dealing with numbers here. 12% of the country has student debt. Okay, that's it. Of that 12% of the country, 56% of those people have masters or PhDs. And there's a neat trick that people try to do on the internet, because when I was researching some of this stuff and sources, they try to go, that's not true, because a little while back, Governor DeSantis in Florida, when he was running for president, had said, he was talking about these kind of issues, and he says, it's not really fair when almost 60% of the debt is for masters and PhDs. And you'll find on the internet, people go, well, that's not really true. It's really... Yeah, you're right, because all those people with master's degrees obviously have to have undergrad debt too. You have to have an undergraduate degree to get a graduate degree. That stands to reason. The point is, these people have PhDs or master's degrees, which means they have higher paying jobs generally than the rest of the population. They should be able to pay their debts. Yes, we know some of that is undergraduate debts. That doesn't mean they have more money. They have more income. They should be able to pay these things. Why are we doing a bailout of people that have masters and PhDs? That doesn't make any sense. Those people traditionally have high paying jobs. Generally, it's not across the board a rule. Obviously, there are situations that happen to people where they can't work or something, but we have programs in place for debt forgiveness for extenuating circumstances. That already exists in the government right now. There are things you can apply for. There are certainly predatory schools that were like not doing their job correctly, and they were bad schools, and the degrees are essentially worthless. And we already have programs to fix that kind of thing. I'm talking about generally, I don't want my tax dollars to go to someone that has a PhD. I don't care what it's in. I don't care if they're a doctor or a lawyer or if they got a PhD in gender studies. I don't think I should pay for it. And so, yeah, that 56% of that, so more than half of that little sliver of the country that has student debt are people with masters and PhDs. Please explain to me, someone, why that is morally okay for 88% of the country who, most of those people that never even go to college, either because they don't have the opportunity, they don't want to, or the job they want to get it's not required that they go to college. I mean, pick the reason. Why is it morally okay for those people to pay the debts of people that went to school for masters and PhDs and statistically have higher paying jobs than them? I just think that's wrong. And I'm changed my mind on it. I'm willing to talk about it, but I don't think I can find a reason to do that. So here's a couple of graphics to kind of show that. I realize if you're listening, again, you can't see this. So this is the average amount borrowed to complete a degree. So obviously, as you go up in degrees, you're going to spend more money because you're spending more time in school, not to mention some of those people are going to more expensive schools, more prestigious schools. If you're going to go get a medical degree, you're not getting it from a community college because no such thing exists, I assume, right? So associate's degree, the average amount borrowed is $14,000, okay? You go to bachelor's degree, it's $34,000. You go to master's degree, you borrow an average of $80,500 essentially. And then law degree, $118,000. A PhD, $132,000. If you have a medical degree, your average debt amount borrowed is $250,000. That, no doubt, is a lot of money. But do you know what also happens is if you get one of those degrees, you end up with a job that pays more money. So here's, let's see if I've got that graphic. I don't think I did the right graphic here. Okay, so I don't have that graphic, I guess. But it's an exact opposite of what this chart is. if you have a medical degree, you get paid a lot more money. If you have a PhD, you get a lot more money. If you have a law degree, you're a lawyer, you get more money than someone that just has an associate's degree. And so it works out. You're making more money and you can pay off that debt, or you should be able to pay off that debt, right? Because if you have a higher education level, therefore you probably have more income and you should be able to pay that debt. And that seems like simple math. I know there are going to be edge cases where that's not the case. Maybe you got a PhD in theater arts or something. Yeah, that's probably not going to pay off the debts. But I'm talking about medical degrees, I'm talking about professional PhDs, and even doctorate ones. You know, those are generally high-paying jobs. And so this is not a group of people who need to be bailed out. It would be different. I've heard it proposed that if you really wanted to bail out debt, you'd be better off bailing out auto loan debt, because auto loan debt would be something that cuts across all demographics. So poor people have auto loans, rich people have auto loans, business owners have auto loans. If you decide to be a plumber and you get an apprenticeship with a plumber and then you open your own plumbing business, you probably have to have some sort of truck or van or something. You probably have to get an auto loan on that. To me, that would be a more fair way to cut across all demographics, would be like, let's forgive car loans. I'm not saying we should do that. I'm just saying if you wanted to forgive debt, if that was really what the goal here was, because we talk about this being a crisis, but it's not really a crisis. I've got some stats here on that. Let's see if I can find them. Okay. Of course, I don't think I wrote it down. Okay, so we say it's a crisis, but is it really a crisis when I think we have a total of $1.4 trillion? I should have written this down somewhere, but it was like $1.4 trillion, I think, was the total. Oh, no, here it is. I'm sorry, I've got it here. Okay, we've got $1.75 trillion in student loan debt currently in the country, but we also have $1.5 trillion in auto loan debt. So they're almost the same number. They're not even that far away, right? And so why is one called a crisis and the other one isn't? Is it because there's fewer, like those debt numbers are higher for a smaller number of people? No, I think the reason it's called a crisis is because who are the people in the media? Most of them are college educated. So there's a little bit of a filter bubble there. If you are in the media and you're college educated, you are going to be more sympathizing to other college graduates, probably, because you have college debt. You know what that was like, even if you paid it off. And so that's one thing, is the media is going to call this a crisis all the time. Politicians are in the same boat, including most of their staff, right? So there's kind of a bubble effect here where I think that they're not really considering the other people because they're not surrounded by the other people. They're not surrounded by people that don't have college degrees. Most of them do have college degrees. So there's that kind of problem. The other problem is that you're going to have Biden wants to get votes from people. That's what this is really about. If he didn't, he needs to gain back some of the young voters that he's losing on stuff like Israel, like the war in Gaza, where he's losing people there, or he's losing people with other kind of stuff that he's been consistent about, and yet his young voters are going to leave him. This is like very much Biden's constituency, that, because the left, the Democratic Party, has become the party of college educated elites. That's just shifting. That's shifting right now before our eyes. Republican Party is gaining working class voters, and those people have been leaving the Democratic Party. And meanwhile, we've had this kind of flip of it. It used to be that the Republican Party was a little bit more, I don't want to say elitist, but it was more business and commerce and that kind of stuff. And those were kind of people at the top. And it was a little bit more, I guess, elitist maybe. And that's kind of totally flipped in the last 15 years-ish. I mean, it kind of started, I feel like, post-2008. Obviously, Donald Trump really ramped that up in 2016, and now it's almost an exact flip. So it's weird because we're watching all this change right before our eyes, but Biden knows this, and he's got to... I don't have the graphic, but basically there was a poll out this week where it showed that, I don't know if this was just in swing states or if it was across the board. I think it was just in swing states, but it looked at basically Trump is getting a little less than 1% in polling of what he got in 2020 in those swing states. There's like 7 swing states right now. Whereas Biden has lost like 6 or 7 points with those same people. So he's lagging way behind where people voted for him in those states. They're looking at here's the numbers of people that voted. Here's what the polling says now. So Biden's been losing people. It's not that Trump is gaining people. Right now, Trump is winning in those swing states. in all of them, I think, but I think Pennsylvania now, some of the polls have Biden barely edging out Trump right now, but it doesn't look good for Biden right now. He's got to get some people who voted for him in 2020 to vote for him again. And one of the ways he got people to vote for him in 2020 is to promise that he was going to forgive this student debt. So this is totally a campaign thing. I think Biden knows it's going to get struck down by the courts. I think this is a super dangerous way to do politics. I do not like when we promise things to people and then we go, well, we got to follow through on it. I've got to prove that I'm a fighter. I've got to say, well, I fought for your rights, but that darn Supreme Court, they're illegitimate. And that's the thing I hate the most about this, is that what we end up doing is I can't talk today. Delegitimizing. I am so sorry for that absolute word vomit of trying to pronounce that word. But we're doing that to the Supreme Court. Both sides are doing it when they don't get their way. I don't like that. I think that it's wrong to saddle the Supreme Court with that when you already know it's illegal. I plainly think that if you put your hand on the Bible and swear to uphold the Constitution and you try to do something that you know is illegal, but you just know the courts will stop you from doing, that is impeachable, in my opinion. I don't think we should have people in government that do this kind of stuff. And yet Biden, that's exactly what's happening here. He's just going for votes. This is just about getting those college-educated elites to vote for him, especially young people in the 18 to 39 range, because those people have most of this debt too. So it's gross, right? I don't like it. So, the average college degree holder earns more than people that don't have college degrees. They have more employment, so there's fewer people. The unemployment rate, if you have a college degree, is very, very small. I do not have the number in front of me, but it's smaller than any other demographic, right? So non-college educated is going to have higher unemployment rates. So they're employed, they're paid better. We should not be bailing them out. This is just Biden's constituency. This is who he needs. This is who Democrats need. Trump did this too while he was in the White House. The example would be his tariffs that he implemented cost a lot of money because it cost a lot of jobs. And then we had retaliatory tariffs from China and stuff that hurt farmers. Well, he did a bailout for farmers because even though his tariff policy is the thing that hurt the farmers, it helped to go, here's a big pile of money to help you out. And, to some degree, he did this too with the student loan stuff. Trump paused student loan payments during COVID. And, that's something, as Nancy Pelosi just taught us, is something the president can do. He can pause stuff, he can delay things, but he cannot cancel the debt. Now, I have maybe some disagreements about giving people a 2 or 3 year moratorium on having to pay anything for their student loans when we were also infusing them with a bunch of cash. And the point was we were trying to hey, well, don't spend that money on your student loans, spend it on the economy because we need to get the economy going again. Whatever, we can have a reasonable discussion on if that's a smart idea or not. But this is just something that is getting more and more prevalent where politicians are essentially picking their policy based on how they're going to get votes. I realize that sounds really simplistic, and to say that, well, yeah, obviously every politician is trying to do policy that gets them reelected, but it's not for the betterment of the country anymore. There are certain policies that I think are genuinely, hey, we're trying to make things better, and it happens to be popular, and it will be something that gets me reelected. I'm fine with that kind of thing. I don't like these little carve-outs for very small percentages of the population based on, I need that group of people to vote for me. So this is a carve-out for the college-educated elites and young people that he needs to vote for him. That's exactly what this is. It's essentially just a campaign trick. And that's why we didn't get details on the numbers for this and how much it was going to cost, but we did get details about all the places he and Kamala Harris are going to go to talk about this, because it's essentially a campaign thing. So I don't think this is legal. I do not think it's going to hold up in court. That's the hope here, is that I don't think this is really something that is going to work for him. But regardless, even though I don't think it's going to hold up in court, I still think it's really bad for everything. And I normally don't like to talk about stuff on here that I don't think will matter. And this is kind of one of those things. I don't think it's actually going to matter because I don't think it's going to work. And I don't think he's going to end up forgiving student debt. But I think we're going to keep being in this pattern. And I think specifically him trying to delegitimize the court, because the court comes in and says this is illegal, as saying, well, that illegitimate conservative court is the problem. It's not that what I'm doing is illegal. That's not the problem. I just don't like how we've gotten further and further into this kind of pattern of doing this to people. And it seems like Biden even knows this is illegal. I don't believe for a second. The way he's phrasing the stuff is like, well, and if it holds up, if it stands, if we can implement it, kind of hedging on the fact that it probably won't. And I think this is like a cancer in our politics is these promises by politicians of things that they can't deliver on. This is specifically illegal, I think, and it's been proven to be illegal by the Supreme Court. But then to blame other people for that, and I also don't like how often in presidential politics we get people, and this was a kind of a weird year because we end up with two basically incumbents. We have two people that have already been president before. This has only happened one other time in the history of our country where two people who have already been president are running again. And what I think is, so what was kind of weird about the primary is that we didn't really get to have a substantive primary debate, even on the right, because it was really just so clearly Trump was going to run away with this thing, and it didn't really work out. But, in 2016, when we had a full field on the Democrat and Republican sides, you had a lot of people coming out there and saying, like, on day one, I'm going to do this for gun control, or day one, I'm going to do this for this, or, I will do this in my first 100 day, and I promise this, and I promise that. Almost none of which the president has power to do. You have to have Congress with you. I really did appreciate Nikki Haley at the debates saying, look, let's talk about abortion, which I've not delved into. I wanted to. There's been a lot of abortion news this week. I'm going to try to talk to someone who knows more about it than I do, sort of an expert in it, probably for next week's show. We'll see. But, she basically said, look, you guys can talk about what abortion policy you support or just don't support at the federal level. But the truth is you need 60 votes in the Senate to pass anything. And we don't have 60 votes in the Senate. We don't even have 50 votes in the Senate right now. So realistically, that's just not possible what you're promising. And I appreciate that she came out and said that just because it was pragmatic. Some people didn't want to hear it. I'm not saying she's right on the policy or who's right or wrong on the policy. I'm just saying she is correct in the assessment that you have to pass laws, you have to get 60 votes in the Senate, which means right now in such a sharply divided country where we're basically we're split 50-50 or 51-49 kind of all the time in the Senate over the last decade. And you're not going to get 60 votes on things that are that divisive. And therefore you have to compromise, but no one wants to compromise because if you compromise, you're not fighting. Biden could go to Congress and say, here's what I want to do, and come up with something, but it wouldn't be enough to make this constituency he's going after happy. And he also probably just wouldn't happen when you've got a Republican controlled House, right? But I think this is like a cancer, the way we look up to presidents too much. We believe them when they say they can do all this stuff. And when they have to when it comes time to pay that check that they wrote, they do it in any way they can think of, including the illegal ways, and just punt it down the road. And this is bipartisan. George W. Bush did this. He signed, what was the law that he signed where he literally said out loud, I don't think this is constitutional, but we'll see. Oh, I don't think you should sign the bill if you think it might be unconstitutional. You've got smart lawyers that work for you. You can have them look at this and determine, do you think it is? Do you think it isn't? If there's even, if it's not you got a really good group of people that say, yeah, this is definitely legal, and you sign it, and then it gets struck by the courts, fine. That's, I'm sure, going to happen. But if the people around you and you even say out loud, this might not hold up, but I'm going to sign it anyway, and let's just see what the Supreme Court says, I think that's a really bad way to treat the Supreme Court. I think that's why the Supreme Court has gotten so polarizing for people. I don't think the Supreme Court is something that we should know the names of the Supreme Court justices. Their job should be to just interpret the law and knock stuff down when they should. They shouldn't be making up law like they did with Roe. That's what happened with Roe v. Wade. I mean, they just made up law. The Supreme Court should not be making law. They should be interpreting existing laws and saying they can strike it down, but they can't make laws. That's not what the judicial branch is supposed to do. But some people want the judicial branch to do that too. An interesting caveat I heard on a podcast was that because of Congress's inaction, we're expecting the other branches to take over for that. So because Congress is in such gridlock, and I'm curious to read the piece that they were talking about, but their proposal was to change the filibuster, which, the filibuster is that 60 vote limit that we have to get to. And we already changed it. Democrats already changed it for circuit court judges during the Obama administration, at which point Mitch McConnell said, hey, you're probably going to regret that if you do this. And sure enough, McConnell and the Republicans said, you know what? Well, we're going to change it so that you don't need 60 votes for Supreme Court justices. We can confirm them with 51 or 50 plus the vice president. And they did that. So we've already gotten rid of the filibuster for those things, for judges. And my guess is we'll see that because the only people that were holding out for keeping the filibuster on the Democrat side were Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema, who are exiting the Senate. So if Democrats control the Senate, honestly, I think it doesn't matter which way the Senate goes in November. I don't see how the filibuster exists in 2025 because if I can see. It depends. If you have the White House and the Senate with the same party, so if Trump wins and Republicans take the Senate, then I think Republicans will get rid of the filibuster. They will not get rid of the filibuster if Biden is the president, though, and vice versa. That's just my prediction, if I had to predict something. So I think that will go away. I think that will be potentially bad, but there's anyways, this podcast I was listening to was about a proposal to say, okay, well, what if we got rid of the filibuster, but we made something have to be voted on twice with a different Congress. So you could do it like once now, but it wouldn't really be enacted until another Congress got elected and also voted for it again. It'd be a way to maybe get stuff moving without having to have that 60 vote threshold. Kind of interesting stuff. But the point is the gridlock in Congress, a lot of people are fed up with, which is why Congress has such a low approval rate. And so they're wanting the presidency, the executive branch, and the judges to take over for Congress, not doing their job. This is all really a big mess. I just think that we can really get into bad policy at that point because you're going to have executive orders that get overwritten the next president that comes in, and then his executive orders are going to get overwritten by the next president, and you're going to have the same thing happening with judges and courts. And I just think that's not what our founders thought the country would be like. They thought Congress would be jealous guardians of their power. That's not happening right now. They're kind of not getting anything done. There's a bunch of people in Congress who don't even pretend to want to get things done because they'd rather just be on TV all the time. Anyway, don't need to necessarily jump on Congress about all this stuff, but that's the problem, is that Congress is the body that can forgive student debt if they want to. And let's have that discussion. I'm fine with having that discussion. You know where I stand. I think it's immoral. I don't think we should do it, but let's have that discussion. It's totally legal for Congress to do that. I would still be against it, but I wouldn't say it's illegal. Now, there's probably some ways it would be illegal. Obviously, I'm not in the weeds of that, but let's have that discussion. I think that would be a good discussion to have, but we should not just let one guy who's the president do this stuff unilaterally. You got to remember, and I think what really makes me the most upset is that people go, well, yeah, let's let Biden do this stuff. It'd be great. It's for okay, every time you give him permission to do something, you're also imagine your worst enemy, which is not hard for liberals to think of because it's Donald Trump, right? That's their worst fear, right? And so imagine Trump having that power and doing the same thing with his constituency. What if he's going to say, well, I'm going to forgive all the car loans of people, but only if they're Republican voters, which, is not that much different than this. You could qualify that in a way to do that. He's, like I said, he sort of bailed out farmers in a similar way to say, these are people that are probably in my constituency anyway, so it would do me good. I need them to reelect me in 2020. I need to give them some money because of the tariff situation. That was gross too, right? So imagine the power you're giving your side, and then imagine giving it to the other side or your worst nightmare of a president. And that's what we keep doing. We just keep giving them more and more things. Here's the other problem with all the college debt stuff. It's not just immoral because you're saying 88% of the country is going to pay this 12% of the country's debt. And especially when that 12% probably is more employed and higher paid. That's the immoral part of it. But it also does absolutely nothing to fix the price of college. Tuition has gone through the roof over the last 30 to 40 years. Most of that is because of the government's involvement in it. As the government just pays these loans to the schools they don't have any reason to lower their cost because that's not really what they're competing on. They're competing on prestige, so the name of the school. They're now kind of competing for who has the best amenities and stuff. We've kind of turned college into I feel like it's extended adolescence. It's just kind of going like, well, this is fun times before you have to be an adult. We're not really teaching kids how to be lifelong learners. We're not really teaching them how to think for themselves. We're teaching them what they are supposed to think. I know there's probably a better way to say that, but you just look at all the stuff that's going on college campus, and there's this group think problem. The DEI stuff is obviously an entire other episode I could go into, but we've got all these kind of really gross, liberal, very far left progressive ideas that we're putting in people's heads in a lot of college campuses. And we're teaching them that their feelings are more important than anything else. And like they can be in danger because of a conservative speaker coming on campus. And we're teaching them that ideas are violence and stuff. This is really weird stuff that's going on college campuses. And there's a lot of research. I really like the Coddling of the American Mind, which is Jonathan Haidt and Greg Lukianoff book from, I think, 2017, 2019, something like that. And I think it's 2019. It's got great stats on like all this stuff that's going on college campuses. So the college education is getting worse as far as like what you get for your money, while that price goes higher and higher. And this would do nothing but make that worse. Because if you just forgive all this loan, that's going to encourage people to do it again. Because they're going to be like, well, someone else will bail me out in the future. I think this is really bad because we do need to solve college being as expensive as it is. Something we absolutely need to talk about. We need to find solutions to it. I've heard some really interesting ones, like where some colleges are starting to tie the amount you owe them to the amount you earn after graduating. So it is in the college's best interest to get you a good job, because they would be like, look, you're going to pay us back based on a percentage of what you earn. So if I get you a job that, you earn $100,000, we're going to get our full tuition back. But if we don't get you employed, as well as that, or your degree ends up being kind of worthless, we don't get paid. So we've got to incentivize colleges to get paid on the back end of like the results of that. And we're just not doing enough result stuff. We're not looking at, okay, from this college, the people that graduate, and let's look at it specifically for minorities and people from disadvantaged backgrounds too, because if you're not advantaging them by giving them that education, then what's the point? Are you just patting yourself on the back because you had minority students or poor students at your school? If you're not bettering their lives, I think we need to be able to measure that to say, yeah, here you go, here's your money for it. But if you're just cranking people through the system, and there's a specific problem with colleges, with minorities specifically, where obviously I think this is not me just bashing on college. I know it sounds like I hate college. I went to one semester of college myself, and then I quit, and I was in a band for a long time. I did a musician thing, and then I went back as an adult. So I went back as a 27-year-old, I think, to college. Maybe I was a little younger. Yeah, 27, I think it was. And so I was in college with younger people, and I was already kind of shocked at how lax everything was. The professors would give a due date for something. I would turn it in. No one else in the class would. And they'd be like, all right, well, you can turn it in later, I guess. And I'd be like, well, what do I get? Some sort of extra credit for being the person that heard you and turned it in on time? And there was already this sort of coddling of people. You could tell retention was the main goal. It was like every professor had this thing at the end of the semester. You had to fill this thing out. It was like basically us grading the teacher. And honestly, those people that get bad grades on that are getting fired or moved around out of colleges if they're not tenured, because the colleges need to retain these students. And so, I just think that we've got to fix college. Now, like I said, that'll be a whole different episode, but none of this that Biden wants to do would fix college. None of it. Because what do you think colleges are going to do if the demand for college keeps increasing, because that is what everyone says. I mean, everyone's like, you got to go to college, got to go to college. Well, the truth is there are lots of other paths to having a good career and a good life that aren't college. We should talk more about those things, but college is a good thing for a lot of people. And there are certain jobs that if you want to do, you have to have a college degree, right? Me talking on a podcast, not necessary to have a college degree. Believe it or not, shocker. But so there's that. So you're going to have the demand for college increasing because some people are saying you have to go to college. It's important to go to college. And I'm not saying we shouldn't say that, but let's stipulate why. And then B, the federal government's going to give you loans, give absolutely anyone loans for any reason to go to college, and they're going to pay the price no matter what. There's not any sort of cap on how much the college can be. There are caps on state colleges, but not private. So there are caps on state tuitions and stuff. but that doesn't happen on private ones, and that's where a lot of this debt actually is. And then C, you're going to forgive the loans. What they're sort of admitting is an overpriced diploma, because that's the other thing. We're always talking about how the cost of college has gone is outpaced everything else, and it's too expensive. And so we're sort of admitting that, for example, if you go to college, you get that degree, and then you can't pay the loan back, doesn't that mean that piece of paper might have been kind of worthless? I'm not saying all college degrees are worthless. I'm just saying part of the argument for forgiving student debt is that some of those degrees are too expensive for what they got out of it. Well, so this does not solve that cost problem. And I just think that's something we absolutely have to do. And this is actually burdening people with more debt that they don't actually need. I think to tell every high school student, or even younger than that, like, yeah, gotta go to college. You gotta go to college. What we end up doing with minorities a lot of times is going, you got to go to college, you got to go to college. And there was a study in California specifically at all the state schools, because they said, we're going to accept, I think they had some sort of quota of how many minorities they're going to do. And I think there was also a thing where if you graduated, I think this was California, don't totally believe everything I'm saying here because I don't have these notes in front of me, but I'm pretty sure California had a situation where it was like if you were in the top 10% of your class, you got accepted to state colleges. And I want to say it's free. I don't know. I can't remember the price part there. But either way, the point was what this study figured out was that they were accepting, let's say you go to a poor inner city school and you're in the top 10% of that school versus being the top 10% of like a really high performing private school. Okay. Those are going to be different demographics, right? We're going to have different levels. The guy that's in the top 10% of maybe the urban school that is not as good a school, honestly, these private schools, all they do is prep you to go to college. And that's not necessarily what the goal is in most public schools. It's like you got to be at these levels for reading and math and all these kind of things. And maybe you go on to college, but if it's not specifically for that, what happens is these minorities and poor kids that go from these, lesser high schools to these elite colleges, they feel lost and overwhelmed, and they have no idea how to do it because they've not had any kind of training. These kids in private schools have been like essentially in this sort of collegiate mode, tons of homework and high expectations and stuff, and which gets them more prepared for college. And what ends up happening to a lot of these minority students in this study in California was they drop out. So now they're saddled with debt because they don't get the degree because they realize like, this is overwhelming. I can't do this. And so sometimes it doesn't help to put a kid from a poor neighborhood at USC. It would be better for us to go like, hey, we think it's important that you go to college if you want to, but we think you should go to this community college that's maybe a better stepping stone, or a junior college or some sort of thing where it's like, we can get you there, but there's a better plan than just saying like, look at us, pat on the back. We've got all these minority kids. If those minority kids drop out of college and then are saddled with that debt, that is also immoral. And I know we have the best of intentions, but intentions don't necessarily matter in this situation. You've caused a bad situation, right? So we've got to talk about this kind of stuff. And yeah, we've got to talk about the 1.75 trillion in student debt we have, but we can't, I don't think we can look at that as a specific crisis if we're not also talking about like auto loan debt, and we're not talking about mortgage debt and these other things, right? I just think that we're not having the conversation at all. So let's have that conversation, right? And by the way, these are some other stats on the college loan stuff, just to put your mind at ease. The average monthly student loan payment is $287. This is according to a study by the Cato Institute. That same study showed that the annual student loan payments are approximately 6% of the income of an average graduate salary. So to put that in perspective, I don't have the math. I'm not going to do that math right now because I can't do it in my head. But so average monthly payment, $287, which is 6% of their income. We're not talking, you're going to hear stories on the right. This is where the right media gets things wrong, that this is all people with PhDs in gender studies and they have $100,000 in debt that's not true. The vast majority of student loan debt is held, and it's between $2,000 in debt and $40,000 in debt. That's something like 70% of the debt in the country. It's not a bunch of people with $100,000 in debt. It's not a bunch of people that got underwater basket weaving degrees or something. It's people with legitimate degrees. In fact, I've got this. Let's see if I've got this up. That's not it. Hold on. Let me see if I can find this. Hold on. I've got this other thing up. Oh, I didn't open it. That would be why it's not coming up. Let me open this because this is interesting. This is a thing that breaks down the degrees and specifically how much debt they have. So let's actually look at that. Sorry, let me pull it up. And this is not going to make any sense to you if you're listening. Sorry about it. Let me zoom in on it a little bit. Okay, let's try this again. Okay, so this is the student debt rankings of bachelor degree programs, okay? So at the top with the most debt is like behavioral sciences, and this is just for bachelor degrees, so this is not for graduate degrees. So that would be the average, the 2022 median debt was $42,000 for people with behavioral sciences, and then we start going down. So religious education, $32,000. Look, this is just my random opinion. You probably don't need $32,000 in student debt for a religious education when what's the average pastor pay, right? This is where we've got to do a better job of going like, what do you want to do for a living? Okay, that's something that doesn't pay very much money. So we should be as frugal as possible in getting the education to do that job. And some of these are not going to, like culinary arts and related services. Why do you need a bachelor? My wife's a chef. She went to a specialized school for like a culinary school for 2 years for an associate's degree. Why do you need a bachelor's degree for culinary stuff? You need to get in a kitchen or get in a restaurant, start working. There's some of these things that we just need to do better training in high school and better talks with students to be like, what do you want to do? What's the right path for them? This is all a mess, but we go down then education, literature, natural sciences. These are all things that have a little bit more debt. As we get to the bottom of the list, this is someone that has like a cognitive science degree is like $18,000 in debt, or business operations support, $19,000 in debt. Marine sciences, $22,000 in debt. History, $22,000. Most of these are in the low. Most of these are not things that have $100,000 in debt. They're things that have $20,000, somewhere around that range. This is where that falls into that. Your average payment's going to be like $200 something a month. A lot of these things are going to have good paying jobs, well enough paying that it's going to be, 6% of your income is not nothing, but I think I might spend that at like Chick-fil-A every month. My goodness, I go there a lot. I gave up sweet tea and sugary drinks for Lent, so my budget was a little bit less because I wasn't drinking as much sweet tea lemonade, but still significant, but maybe not 6%. But anyway, the crisis is not the student debt. The crisis is the cost of higher education, okay? And the fact that these degrees are increasingly worth less than they used to be because, like I said, colleges having to be about retention and they're not really failing people. And the other problem that causes is that bachelor's degree becomes less prestigious. Now there's a lot of jobs that are saying you have to have a master's, you have to have a PhD, it's master's normally. And I think we're over-educating stuff. I actually think we should reduce. We have a doctor shortage. We're going to have a doctor shortage as sort of the boomers start retiring, or they already are. But as some of those, even Gen Xers start retiring, we're going to have a doctor shortage. I think we should shorten medical school. I think if you want to go to medical school, why are we saying you have to have a 4-year undergrad degree? Let's get them in medical school quicker. Let's make that not be as high of a bar. Let's do that with any kind of things. Even my sister is speech pathologist. Since she has left college, which would have been, 18-ish years ago, the requirements for that are now that you have to have a master's degree. You didn't used to have a master's degree. Now you have to have a master's degree. So you got to tack on 2 more years. So that's, to me, the crisis, that we're forcing some people to spend more money. I think this is starting to change as you're starting to see some technology companies not requiring a bachelor's degree to even apply. There were some states that have kind of put their money where their mouth is and said, hey, we're not going to require a bachelor's degree for government jobs anymore, unless they very specifically need the degree, something like an architect or something, right? But we can talk all about that kind of stuff. But you don't have to go to college to be successful, right? That's something that we've not done a good enough job telling people. And sometimes, honestly, in this situation where I'm probably a little biased. My bias here is that I'm surrounded by mostly people that either didn't go to college or are entrepreneurial, own their own business. Their college degree didn't actually help them start their business or anything. And so my bias is definitely that I'm surrounded by a lot of people that went maybe my college degree wasn't really worth it, or they just bypassed it completely. I have several friends that just bypassed it. They said, this is stupid. I shouldn't spend this much money on something. I should just go get a job. And that job turned into a career or turned into a business or whatever. So I'm a little bit biased in the sense that I'm surrounded by several people that chose a path other than college and are very successful. That's the other thing, is that I just feel like that needs to be told more, that you can be successful with our college degree. In fact, sometimes that college degree can hamper you because it's saddling you with debt that you might not need. There are plenty of jobs where you absolutely, I want a lawyer to have a college degree, obviously, right? I need you to study law. I need you to get a law degree. Architects, doctors, there's lots of jobs where we need that. Even teachers to some degree, I think that we could potentially like not require a master's degree for a teaching job that might not pay enough to really be worth that much of their income going towards paying student debt, right? I think we need to rethink even some of that kind of stuff. And like I said, let's do an episode sometime. I'll have someone on. We'll talk about how to fix college. I'm not saying I have the answers for that right now, but I just think we've got to have a discussion about this. But I don't think the right way to do is just to say like, look, this small group of people who happen to be people that will more likely vote for Democrats than not should have their debt forgiven. I think that's the part where I can't get on board. So that's it for me. Thanks for joining me on today's episode of The Homeless Conservative. Your time is very valuable, I know, and so I'm grateful that you chose to spend some of it here with me. If you liked what you heard, the best thing that you can do for me is rate the podcast or share it with a friend. You can also subscribe on YouTube and Instagram at The Homeless Conservative, where I'm doing short form content and some live stuff. I'm kind of throwing stuff at the wall, seeing what sticks. You can also feel free to reach out because I love hearing from you and hearing your questions or comments. Tell me where you think I'm wrong. Totally fine with that. Let's have the discussion. I like having a discussion. So you can send me an email at blake@thehomelessconservative.com or hit me up on YouTube or Instagram at The Homeless Conservative. Your input does mean a lot. It really does. I really like hearing from you all. Other than that, that's it for me. I'll talk to you next time.